Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. Today is a monumentous day in the fight for civil rights. Democrats in Texas are standing up for you and for me. They're heroes like MLK, like Nelson Mandela fighting apartheid. Yes, like Moses leading the Jewish people out of slavery in Egypt. Only instead of a pillar of fire going before them, they will board a private jet headed not for the Red Sea, but Washington, D.C. Surely Hollywood will make an Oscar-winning movie out of it this year. Maybe they'll even call it Braveheart 2, because Hollywood is out of ideas, but I digress. Kamala Harris even had to stop to comment on this monumentous sacrifice that Texas Democrats are making on behalf of freedom. Here she is.
I do want to first start by making a statement about the legislators in Texas who are showing extraordinary courage and commitment. I met with them when many of them traveled to Washington, D.C. We sat down and had an extensive conversation in the Roosevelt Room in the White House. And I applaud them standing for the rights of all Americans and all Texans to express their voice through their vote, unencumbered. I will say that they are leaders who are marching in the path that so many others before did when they fought and many died for our right to vote.
Yes, Democrat representatives are like those who fought and died for our right to vote, says Vice President Harris. Like the troops that landed on Normandy, those who fought for our freedom, right out there with the flag raised on Iwo Jima. Here's some of the grandstanding press conference that Texas Democrats put on for the adoring media.
Let me tell you why I left. I left because I am tired of sitting as a hostage in a Texas House of Representatives while Republicans strip away the rights of my constituents to vote. We have fought too long and too hard in this country to get away from having to count beans in a bag, having to count bubbles in a soap bar. Yes. And we have achieved the full right to vote in this country. And when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill in 1965, I thought that would put to rest forever anyone's desire to strip away the rights for anyone to vote. When I look at the fact that we go to Iraq to fight a war and give those persons the right to vote over there, and yet in our own homeland, we have citizens who are a part of this country, the fabric of this country. We want to strip away their rights. And that is the reason why that we are refusing to be allowed to remain Republican hostages in the Texas House of Representatives.
Yes, they have fought too hard to let there be sensible and fair voting laws, like, I don't know, having voting times and the days be regular across the state of Texas, and also add additional hours to early voting. Just strips away votes when you do that. So the Texan Democrat representatives courageously boarded that cushy private jet with no masks, something you and I'd be arrested for, and they headed to Washington to fight for all Texans' right to vote, even people who are dead and don't live in Texas, because they should also have the right to vote too. Anyone, yes, everyone should be able to vote, even if we can't be sure who they are because they have no ID. In fact, many Democrats are saying that Republicans shoring up voting laws with oppressive rules, like just simply producing an ID to vote, is the greatest threat to democracy ever. Just like January 6th was the greatest attack on our country since the Civil War, bigger than 9/11, bigger than Pearl Harbor, bigger than anything. Is anybody else buying this? Are you? I mean, it's kind of hard to watch, right? It's like a friend descending into madness. And we all know that part of being a Marxist Democrat is being very narcissistic, someone who thinks that they are more moral than other people. But this, which we are witnessing, this is chef's kiss, a whole new level of performance art. Take a look at this virtue signaling on Capitol Hill from this morning. Watch if you can.
We'll overcome. We will overcome. We will overcome someday.
We will overcome today.
How many Democrats does it take to carry a tune in a bucket? More than what you see here. So is the Democratic Party having a mental breakdown at this point? We do see paranoia on display every day. White supremacy, they shout as they wall off the Capitol with fences and establish field offices for the Capitol Police. The FBI is asking you to snitch on your neighbor or family member. Who are these extremists that Democrats fear? Their own citizens. That's what paranoia looks like. They're living in a fantasy world in which they play a hero that is fighting for rights they already have. Yeah, against an enemy that doesn't actually exist. So in case you're wondering what this is really all about, I'll tell you. This petulant, mentally unstable behavior is what happens when Marxist Democrats figure out that they're going to lose majorly on a policy issue. See, Democrats, for all of their talk of democracy, don't actually like democracy because democracy means that sometimes you don't get your way. And in this case, Democrats are upset that Texas Republicans want to ensure that the sloppy election of 2020 doesn't happen again. And by the way, they're also, again, making sure that county by county, all of the voting times and laws and regulations are the same. And also they're adding on additional hours to early voting, which somehow is oppressing people. Now, I'm going to make this simple. All Republicans are arguing for is that there be sensible laws that are the same across the state, things that America has already had for quite a long time. And these, by the way, the same ones that Democrats never complained about until just now. Suddenly, simply returning to the constitutional rules pre-coronavirus is a threat to democracy, they shout. And sidebar to all of this, too. What we're talking about are emergency authorization of things like ballot boxes and drive-through voting that was only implemented because of a lockdown. That was it. That hadn't even always been in place. And then again, they added hours to early voting, which is somehow like stripping rights from people. I don't know. No, but it is a threat to one-party rule. So they make up boogeymen like democracy is on the line. And maybe if you persist in believing lies like this long enough, maybe you actually start to believe them. Democrats are growing increasingly irrational, even with talking points on voting. And to prove how insane this whole temper tantrum is, think about it. They want you, the everyday American, to think that they are heroes because they boarded a chartered private jet for DC, which I'm positive they had to show identification to get on just for the manifest. And of course, they made sure that you saw them bravely take flight because they took selfies every second. And they tweeted them out for good measure. They took pictures of their food, everything. Wouldn't want all of that heroism to go unnoticed. After all, these heroes will be painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel someday, and we'll need to know what their oppressive private jet ride at the expense of Texas taxpayers looked like for history. You'll notice in the picture these brave civil rights leaders, they also did something else very courageous. They took off their masks. Yes, sometimes you just have to take a risk and proudly show your face to the world. Delta variant be damned. And speaking of Delta, they're not flying Delta Airlines like you anyways. They're flying private. But when you fly, these public servants insist that you keep your mask on. Not everyone is a civil rights hero. And the rules are different for heroes like Texas Democrats. Do you know that the Delta variant won't actually infect them? Because science. So off they go to Washington, D.C., running away, running to the president, asking him to stop this whole democratic process in our republic because they claim that they care about democracy. See, Democrats want President Biden to federalize all elections, which means Democrats want to create federal voting rules, impose them on all 50 states, which violates the Constitution, by the way, all to ensure that they don't lose an election again. Yeah, you will have no way of rectifying or doing anything to hold your hold your lawmakers accountable for any kind of election problems. This is also, by the way, why they want to end the filibuster, which is so incredibly ironic, I have to say. So they can impose unpopular ideas on you, like open borders and issues that don't even remotely close to poll at 50%. These desperate actions, these are not the actions of people who like logic or who are mentally A-OK. And They left to use this as a filibuster tactic, for people who hate the filibuster. They know America is not coming along with the program. They know Texans aren't either. Texas public policy showed that over half of Texans do not support them running away and abdicating their responsibilities. And they also know, Democrats, that President Biden he's pretty much almost a lame duck at this point. He's done what he can do. He doesn't have the votes to federalize elections or to end the filibuster, and Democrats know it. That is unless they can create another crisis. This time, the crisis is a threat to democracy itself. What is that threat? That the sensible voting laws we had pre-Wuhan will be enforced, as the American people seem to want anyway, as these laws are passing in state after state after state. And now it turns out what these Democrats from Texas did is actually against the law, at least Texas law. A few hours ago, Texas Governor Greg Abbott joined me on my radio program, and here's what he says will happen when these Texas Democrats return to the Republic of Texas.
So one of the most important steps that had to be taken was the one that was made earlier today by the Texas House of Representatives, where they did vote, such that anytime any of these Democrats step foot into the state of Texas, they can and they will be arrested. They will be brought to the Capitol. They will be contained in the Capitol. And what that means is they're going to have to stay out of the state of Texas as long as they want to prevent Texas from being able to pass any type of law that I put onto the special session call.
Will they be met at the border when they land back in Austin? Will they be met by Rangers?
They're going to have a very nice escort.
I actually think this is what these Democrat would-be martyrs actually want, to be arrested. So they put their martyrdom on Instagram. Makes for good theater, gets all the clicks. And this is theater. It's paid performance art, paid for by the Texas taxpayer. Democrats cause the government of Texas to stop functioning, and you pay for the dysfunction, and they post for selfies. You know their staff salaries run out on August 31st? Increasingly, it's becoming clear that we're trying to keep a marriage together with a political spouse that needs some therapy. I'm serious. Where do we go from here? There is no democracy if one party just doesn't even show up and refuses to. And increasingly, it does seem like they're kind of done with the whole democratic process in our republic. They seem intent on demonizing their own citizens and using alarmism over one fake crisis after another as some pretext to end the democratic process altogether. This does not work, and we have to be able to talk. But it seems that they don't want to talk, and they're only interested in obstructionism and forcing their views on us. Interesting fact, too, back in 2020, Republicans in Oregon, they did this exact same thing. Can you imagine what those media headlines were like? Oh my goodness, I shared some of them today, just a little earlier on my radio program. They assailed the Republicans for leaving and doing exactly what Texas Democrats did here, except when Texas Democrats do it, it's for the same publications, very, very interesting result. Who knew that adding hours to early voting actually strips people of rights, and just making sure that voting is consistent across the state of Texas actually suppresses people? Who knew? Coming up, we continue this conversation on the brave Texas Democrats with Dave Reaboi. Keep it here. Senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, David Reaboi, joins me now to discuss those brave and courageous Texas Democrats who fled to save democracy in our republic. David, thank you for joining me.
Great to be here. They're so brave. They're so brave. It's like watching old World War II movies.
I can't wait until there's a Saving Private Ryan version of this stunt that is made and wins all the Oscars for this. But I mean, and really, this is all just this is a stunt. They have to come back at some point because their staff salaries run out, as I understand, on August 31st. And then people are going to start getting quite frustrated with them, including the people that they rely on just to make day-to-day stuff work in Austin. Do you think that they're going to be gone for the full 3 weeks?
Look, I mean, I'm not sure. I think what may happen is they'll just go back when, they'll go back when the media coverage, the positive media coverage stops. I mean, isn't that what this is all about? This is all about them creating yet another media event. When Republicans would do this, sometimes I think they tried something similar in Oregon, and of course the media just was nonstop in attack mode. But these guys, I mean, hey, these guys can also get on a plane and fly without masks. They they can booze it up with cases of beer. It seems like they're having a grand old time. And, I think this is just catnip for the media. Normal people around the country, I'm not sure how it plays in Texas, but I think normal people around the country are looking at this and they're saying, what's wrong with these people?
Yeah, I know. In Austin, it might be a little weird. I think Rick Perry once described Austin as the blueberry in the tomato soup. Who knows how they're going to interpret it there? But what gets me, and in some of those pictures that we showed, these are the same lawmakers that think that having to produce an ID is a form of discrimination. Yet, David, I am not familiar with any flight that is overseen by FAA where you can board, and private or not, and not have to show identification, or even to purchase liquor, that horrible Miller Lite that they had. They didn't even do it Texas a solid by bringing like some, craft beer, like some, Texas IPA or anything else on there. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, these guys, it's just so ridiculous. And it's completely ridiculous. I don't know what to say. It's a comedy and it's farcical. And the more attention that's paid, I think polls have shown this, the more attention that's paid to this voting issue, the more, and people, really understand and read some of these laws that Republicans are trying to pass in order to secure the vote. I think the more the Democrats, the Democrats' position sort of drops like a stone in the polling. As you said, everybody requires ID. You've got to do, you need an ID basically to do everything today. And, but do the one thing that the Democrats don't want you to do, which is vote. And it's ridiculous. People are laughing at Kamala Harris. They're laughing at all these Democrats. This is a real monster task that the media and the Democrats have ahead of them, which is making people believe that this is something crazy and wild and against our democracy.
Yeah, and it really is fascinating to me how they keep going back to January 6th and try to use that as some example of why they have to oppose this. They keep saying, in fact, I was looking at some video a little bit earlier of Joe Biden talking about election reform and Voting Rights Act and all this stuff. And they keep saying that, people didn't accept the election results in 2020, which is weird because that's exactly what Joe Biden, who once referred to Trump as an illegitimate president after the 2016 election, that's exactly what their party has done for the past 4 years. And so the argument, not just from Texas Democrats, but also Democrats, in D.C., their argument is to say, well, we have to be able to pass these and federalize these elections because these people, they were denying fair elections, and then you saw what happened January 6th. That is such a stretch. Is anybody buying this? And I think now, do you kind of see that the whole January 6th insurrectionist thing is sort of now, I think it's outstayed its usefulness. It's now, I think people who did buy it are kind of questioning, wait a minute, really? It looked like a bunch of Gravy SEALs who they lost tourists.
Right. Yeah. I think as far as January 6th goes, I knew from Jump Street that it would be used in order to slander and, in order to slander half the people in the country, and then also, frankly, make them out to be terrorists, and to create a national security problem from what is actually normal political debate in this country. And that's unbelievably sinister, the things that they're doing
but it's
about,
the worst,
about that.
But Dave, it's the worst attack on since the Civil War. It's the worst thing that's ever happened in our country since the Civil War.
Yeah, look, their voters have been driven insane. They will believe it. They still believe Trump is an agent of Russia. I think the smarter Democrats go back and they look at their voters and they realize these people will believe anything. And you still see it. Does any Democrat have the stones to get on Twitter or something and say, you know what, maybe we were wrong about Trump and Russia for 4 years? That Democrat would be run out of town because their voters already believe it. So their voters believe January 6th was the greatest, most horrible thing that has happened to the country since the Civil War, probably even bigger and worse than the Civil War. And and there's really nothing that they can do. Once they're locked into this narrative, I mean, you know as well as I do, there's no changing their minds.
Yeah, no changing their minds at all. We're talking to Dave Reaboi. Dave, this last question for you. This, with what I'm thinking here, HB1, and then you had the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. In 2016, I get a little aggravated when I hear Democrats in the media, and by a little aggravated, it's a lot aggravated, cast aspersions on the character of Americans across the country and suggest that somehow these people are tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists. But Dave, who was it who was telling everyone else that Russia meddled in the elections, that the elections were stolen? You can't trust the system. You can't trust the integrity of your vote. You can't trust that your vote is even going to count. And after hearing that for 4 years, is it a little bit much for Democrats now to turn around and say, oh, well, remember everything that we said in 2016, forget that, you people are crazy for believing anything that we said? Because that's what it's looking like to me. Nothing changed from 2016 to 2020, correct me if I'm wrong, as it relates to voting. Nothing changed as it relates to any kind of ballot security, but suddenly it's a 180 on their position. Your thoughts on that, and is that going to work? Or are they going to end up driving away even more moderate Democrats, the few that they have left?
Well, I'm going to disagree with you. I think that, in fact, a lot changed between 2016 and 2020, which is that all of these, a lot of these voting rules that were passed in the wake of
the pandemic,
they were passed in the wake of the pandemic to ease up, to ease up voting, to make sure that I'm forgetting that they changed deadlines. They made it
ballot
much easier
signature matching.
Right, the signature matching, all of that stuff. They passed, kind of in the dead of night, in the middle of absolute hysteria that the media was creating over COVID. And, so, I mean, that was that had a huge effect on the security of the vote and the integrity of the vote. And, obviously that wasn't present in 2016. And yet they had the chutzpah to tell us that it was absolutely the most free of fraud and clean election in American history. They put their kosher stamp on it. We can call it, the deep state did right after the election. Mm-hmm. And I think, you're right. They spent 4 years, and it wasn't just the media. It was the media plus the people that were in a position to, the people who are supposed to be serious. We all know that Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi and Eric Swalwell, these guys are clowns, and we know that they lie and they're not serious people. But we always assumed that the, Director of National Intelligence, the CIA, the NSA, 17 different intelligence agencies belong to the U.S. government. We always assumed that these people were serious people who wouldn't fabricate something out of thin air just in order to go after their partisan political opponents. But they ended up being exactly those people.
Yeah, exactly. And with all of those agencies, even after Americans saw even the FISA process abused just to spy on political opposition, who would trust the system after all of that? Dave Reaboi, always good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So coming up, Democrats they're bringing everything back. First, they're bringing back net neutrality. They want to go back to that. Now they're renewing calls to pack the court again because they don't like some of the recent rulings that have come out of the Supreme Court. Carrie Severino joins me next to discuss. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to premium people who love America, which is premium. Veteran, CEO, and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Now, Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to enjoy your coffee. In fact, they demand it. Whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour over or cracking open a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever summer takes you, even if you're like running away from Texas to DC. So head to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours and use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee. Black Rifle Coffee. Democrats are renewing their calls to pack the Supreme Court under the veil of protecting voting rights and protecting rights, period. And they're upset over a couple of rulings from the Supreme Court, 6-3 in conservatives' favor. To discuss what this means, Carrie Severino, president of Judicial Crisis Network and co-author of the book Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Court. Carrie, thanks so much for joining me. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
So they don't like the last couple of rulings that came out from the Supreme Court. I have to admit, maybe this is just me being naive, but I thought, well, maybe they've kind of given up on this. But now it seems that the calls have been renewed to revisit this issue. Your thoughts, because they don't have any number. They don't have the number in the Senate, and they really don't have the number in the House to even accomplish something like this. So is this just saber rattling from Democrats?
Well, you're right. At this point, because Senator Joe Manchin, Senator Kristen Sinema have been very clear, they do not want to vote to pack the court. They don't have a majority in the Senate right now that will do that. So thankfully, it seems like that's not something that can happen with the votes we have now. But what concerns me, Dana, is that there's other objectives they have. They would love to actually pack the court, of course, if they could get the votes to do it. But they have a couple other goals. One is to move the overturn window, to make something that up until now, everyone has recognized is just the stupidest idea FDR ever had, and now make it something that's thinkable again, and make it popular in liberal circles so that maybe this year they can't do it, maybe next year, maybe the year after, trying to make that more possible. And then second, I think their goal is to intimidate the court. And that's something that we all should be very concerned about, that the court, for fear that every time, as we saw with these decisions, every time they make a decision that it does not align with the Democrats and especially the liberal dark money groups' interests, there's going to be people saying, oh, okay, time to pack the court. We can't have the court cowering in fear behind that kind of intimidation. But I think that they're going to keep on doing it every time as long as they think that the court might be susceptible to that kind of pressure.
Goodness, that's a very good point as well, because for those who thought that the court couldn't be influenced in any way, that's definitely a way to do it. Carrie, what do you make of the criticisms that you hear from the left, where they say, oh, well, the Supreme Court, the number of justices that were decided upon, that was when the United States was so much smaller, et cetera, et cetera. That seems like a really silly argument to me, but you're the expert on this, so I was curious as to your thoughts.
Oh, look, there's nothing, sacred about the number 9. We've had as few as 5 justices. We have as many as 10 justices. Seems that an odd number is a good idea, right, for a tiebreaker. But I don't think we have to always have the number 9. Here's what we shouldn't do, though. We shouldn't change the number of justices for purely partisan reasons. That's really what earns it the moniker court packing. And yes, people talk about historically there used to be one justice for every circuit court because they had different roles. They used to actually literally ride around their circuit and hear the cases because we didn't have appellate judges in the early days of our country. So, they used to do a different thing. There's no reason we have to have the same number of justices as there are circuits on the court. 9 justices is doing absolutely fine. There's no, it's not like they're overworked or something. They would have no different workload if there were 9, 15, 5, whatever. Really what we're seeing here is pure partisanship. There's no actual historical logic to the number 13. What they would love to do is cancel out the 3 nominees that Donald Trump put on the court and add 1 more for good measure. That's where we're getting the logic of the current proposal, which is adding enough justices to make it a 13-member court. But, if that didn't work, you could see them adding more and more. That's actually what happened in Chavez's Venezuela. It's the kind of objective you would see in a group where they're not interested in the court as an institution or the country. What they are interested in is pure partisan power.
And then, Carrie, it stops being its own entity. I mean, the way that the scaffolding of our government, the framework of our government, every agency, every department, everything is, checks and balances, everything is separate. But this really, what does that, talk to folks a little bit about what, if they were to get the 13 judge Supreme Court, which still sounds insane to me, that really does diminish the significance of and weight of the court's decisions, right?
Well, the biggest thing that would worry me is it means that the court now always has to think, hey, if we don't rule the way that the executive wants, they're just going to go and change the institution. That would be a huge blow to the separation of powers. We're supposed to have 3 independent branches of government. You're supposed to have the executive that enforces the laws, the legislature writes the laws, and the courts that then are interpreting the laws. once you have a system where the courts then become captured and feel like they're beholden to these other branches, you have a real risk of not having that independence. That, of course, is why Democrats are wanting to pack the court. They have control over the other branches, albeit slender control of Congress right now. And it just sticks in their craw that they don't have that third branch completely under their thumb. We need to support an independent judiciary. That's how the framers designed it, so that we could have a government that remains a government of laws, not of men and pure power politics.
Carrie, because when talking to people, whether it's on radio or even on social media or talking to even family, everybody always distills these larger ideas that are happening in Washington, D.C., these larger federal issues. Everyone likes to distill it. They want to figure out how it applies to them. If they're sitting at their kitchen table, they're there with how ultimately does this impact their day-to-day life? Do you think, and I've talked to some folks who have said, oh, this is the end of our republic. If they're able to do this to the Supreme Court, there's no going back. The republic is ended. And I know that the number has fluctuated previously in the past, although I think that, and I may be, again, naive right here and thinking that people were maybe perhaps more virtuous back in the days of yore. But is it really to that extent? I mean, if they're able to be successful, say things go poorly for Republicans 2022 and Democrats are able to get more influence in the House and Senate, they're able to do something like this. Is it really the end of the republic, though?
I think what causes me great concern is the judiciary is designed to be our independent branch, right? And if we can't trust the judiciary to enforce our laws fairly and even-handedly, and not to be intimidated by the other branches, then our republic really is at risk. We have been an incredibly successful country because we can trust the rule of law. That makes us successful in terms of international peace and peace at home. It makes us successful economically because people can recognize that there are laws that they're going to follow. It means that you and I can walk around our daily lives and not have to worry what's going to happen. Even if a party that we don't like wins in the next election, we can trust that our government's going to stay on a relatively steady pace. This kind of thing would destabilize that. We'd have to go, okay, if we've got 13 judges now, eventually, Republicans might win back both the Congress and the White House. What are they going to do? They're going to go to 15. They're going to go to 19. Okay, and then it flops back, and then they go to 25. Even Bernie Sanders, who I don't often agree with, said this would be a crazy idea because eventually you're going to get up to 86 justices. They're not even going to fit in the Supreme Court. That is a horrible type of system, and it would trigger this one-way ratchet. Because remember, you also can't diminish the number of justices very easily. They all have life tenure, so they all just would sit there until they would retire or pass away, and that you're going to have a long series of ratchets and quid pro quos if this kind of thing got started.
Yeah, we're talking with Carrie Severino. Carrie, last question for you. I'm curious as to your opinion on how the court has functioned and the opinions that so far have come down the Supreme Court, because I thought they've been, despite all the fear-mongering that we've heard from the left of, oh my gosh, they have Amy Coney Barrett, they have Gorsuch, they have Kavanaugh, oh, it's going to be so conservative. But really, I thought they've been pretty measured. There are even some Second Amendment cases that they chose not to take up. And there were some cases that I think conservatives were a little disappointed, even though I feel as though they were being very originalist with their intent and with the way that they were adjudicating all of this. What are your thoughts on this? Because I feel that they've really been measured considering it is a conservative majority.
Oh, absolutely. I think they've been consistent. Look, there are decisions I might quibble with. There are cases I wish they would have taken. But, they did take a big Second Amendment case for next term. That's something, when I was clerking on the court in 2007, 2008, that's when the main Heller case came down. Since then, they've almost never taken a Second Amendment case. They finally have taken one. And I think we're going to have a solid court that actually will be faithful to the Constitution in that case. They're taking some of these important issues. I think we're making great progress in the court. Sure, there's some people who wish it would go faster or be more, louder in some of their opinions. But what we have here is a court that at the end of the day isn't looking at, whose team is going to win. What is the outcome I want in this case? You look at the Obamacare case they just decided. I think a lot of justices, like Justice Thomas, said, hey, this law is a messed up law. It's an offense to the Constitution. There's a lot of problems with the law. That case that was brought because of some other legal details, actually wasn't a good case. So Justice Thomas even said it was right not to strike down the law in that case. So they're following the law, even when it might not line up with, their political affiliation. I think that's what a court should be. They should be independent. Right. They should be looking to the text of the law and the Constitution and keeping politics at bay. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see.
And that's a good thing, very much so. Carrie Severino. Carrie, appreciate you, appreciate your voice, loved your book. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Mm-hmm. Well, folks, it looks like there might be another problem with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I don't know, can we actually discuss it, or will YouTube freeze any kind of archive footage of this discussion? We'll talk about that coming up. One of the problems with lying constantly in order to control narratives during a pandemic is that you lose the trust of the American people. There were lies about masks, lies about lab escape theory for a year, lies, that they know for sure that the vaccines are safe and super effective long-term, no questions asked, except that they can't know that. Nobody can. They lie about people needing to take the vaccine for other people when a vaccine is for you. Personally, it's for your protection, after all. Take the vaccine if you're convinced that you need it. That is the way it has always been. So why has that suddenly changed? After all of the lies and incompetence, many people are officially vaccine hesitant. You can't really blame them. Stories like this one don't help. This is an article from the Communist News Network. I had to, come on. It says, quote, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration updated the label on Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine Monday to warn of the possible increased risk of a rare neurological complication known as Guillain-Barré syndrome, end quote. Okay, so score one for the vaccine hesitant. Now, we want to be even-handed because the FDA says that it's extremely rare. Okay, that seems like that could be true. And really, everyone should talk to their doctor about what's right for them. But still, this is news, isn't it? This is the second time that the very safe and effective shot, and this is Johnson & Johnson's, this is the second time that they've been in the news because of questions, concerns, or problems. It's what you might expect when you, rush vaccines to the market and then inject it into people en masse because things happen. And that's why they do long-term testing. That's why they do all kinds of testing, because there are always unintended consequences in every single vaccine, in every single thing. And we should always do our best to know what they are, especially if we're planning on coercing people to take them, especially kids who don't need them. But there's this crazy rush to make everyone take these experimental vaccines, even those that are not high risk. It's just weird. We were told 15 days to slow the spread because our hospitals would become overwhelmed. That's not happening anywhere in America today. Our doctors have gotten better at treatments. We've learned a lot, like who is at risk and who isn't. And now we have people like Dr. Fauci who say that 99.7% of the people who are dying from the coronavirus are unvaccinated. Okay, fine, that's something to consider. Thank you for sharing that information. But then leave it to each person to determine what they should do and want to do with their own body. While 99.7% of people dying from the virus are unvaccinated, only 0.04% of deaths are people below the age of 17. Now that's a pretty infinitesimal risk to kids. So why push parents to make their children take a vaccine? It's just weird. And it's also interesting that just as a booster is being rolled out from Pfizer, we're told that the J&J has a problem for the second time. And the J&J is the only vaccine based on traditional vaccine technology, whereas Moderna and Pfizer, the other FDA-approved vaccines, they're based on the new mRNA vaccine technology. mRNA vaccine technology, this technology has never been tested for long-term side effects, and that's just a fact. It's no one's fault. There wasn't time. We were in a pandemic. I get it. But that said, we're exhibiting some grace here, so people should be allowed to excuse themselves from the table if they're not up for injecting experimental mRNA technology vaccine plus booster cocktail, right? It's their body, their choice. Isn't that right, Democrats? Why is this so hard? We're exhibiting grace for people because they had to rush stuff, so can't you exhibit grace for the people who are hesitant because they had to rush stuff? What's with this groupthink, the shaming and the Borg-like fear-mongering? Coronavirus, it's a virus. It's here to stay, right? That's what a virus does. Flu doesn't go away either. Americans have figured out how to acclimate and live with both. And most have made the choice, their choice for now, so just leave folks alone. If you stop talking about going door to door and screaming about variants and boosters, you might find that people will come around to taking it on their own. And if they don't, well, then who cares? If you've taken the safe and effective vaccine, then you're good to go, right? Except maybe if you are beset by a rare neurological complication, the Guillain-Barré syndrome, for instance, from the safe and effective J&J jab, according to the FDA. But not to worry, because there are 2 other experimental vaccines to choose from that the FDA will be sure to tell you about. You'll know all of the rare complications long after you've taken them. We just need some transparency. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.